So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today, a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Caroline K. Kramer. She's an associate professor at the University of Toronto, Division of Endocrinology and Metabolism, like myself, and she's also an endocrinologist and clinician-scientist at the Leadership Sinai Center for Diabetes at Mount Sinai Hospital. Her clinical work is focused on the pathophysiology and risk factors for the development of type 2 diabetes. In particular, the interaction between obesity and diabetes, risk factors for cardiovascular disease in individuals with metabolic abnormalities, as well as strategies for treatment of type 2 diabetes, including lifestyle interventions. She has received many awards, including the Diabetes Canada Clinician Scientist Award, Banting and Best New Investigator Award, and her research has been funded by Canadian Institutes for Health Research, Diabetes Canada, as well as the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada. And she is a proud friend of Romeo, a miniature black schnauzer. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Caroline Kramer. I'll pass it on to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, for the very kind introduction. I just want to check that you can see my slides. Thumbs up. Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining today. And so I'm going to talk about a bit about non-pharmacology strategies for prevention of cardiometabolic diseases. It's more like a broad concept. I'm not focusing particular about obesity prevention or treatment, but overall metabolic diseases. You're going to see my slides just out of your so you know that there is a little bird that you're gonna see in my slide in all of them. This is because I'm using the same slide deck that I used recently in a Brazilian meeting. So they do provide. So this bird is a bird that is native to South America. So his name is Chiru. He has a kind of indigenous name, just for your information. Okay, so. So those are my disclosures. I do have an investigator-initiated research funded by BI, but otherwise no other disclosures. I always like to say that I'm Brazilian. That's where I'm from. I do have indigenous background, so thank you so much, Lorraine, for the land acknowledgement. And my work, I'm going to share some of my work here that was funded by CI and some of these funding agencies. So as we all know, right? So this is the era of incretin therapies that it's really changing the way that we treat most of metabolic diseases and other diseases that are associated with obesity, right? So every day we kind of come up, we see a new trial being reported showing the immense impact of these therapies, reducing mortality, cardiovascular mortality in patients living with obesity, which is something very new, reducing liver metabolic disease, sleep apnea, improvement in knee disease. So a whole lot of things that in my mind, it just show, of course, how amazing these therapies are, but also the importance of lifestyle, because we are seeing all the benefits of a medication that can improve or reduce the burden of obesity. So just showing that if we can prevent, maybe we can do the same thing, but before people even get to that point. So I like to start my lecture showing this slide here that really makes the point how important it is to talk about lifestyle. So these are stock market of Coca-Cola that continues to increase since 2021. So no changes in terms of the stock market, even after incretins. And Coca-Cola proudly posts in their website that they sell more than 1.9 billion servings per day in more than 200 countries, which is very worrisome for me. So I am gonna talk to you about like the title was Reinventing Story. So I'm gonna try to kind of really trigger and raise aspect and concepts, more like a food for thought on lifestyle as a holistic model of health, some concepts in terms of choices of food as medicine, on physical activity, that we are built to move, not to sit still. And I'd like to finish the talk on some new stories that we do need to write, and also non-pharmacologic approaches and ideas. So once upon a time in South America, we had indigenous communities living there the same way that they used to live, traditional ways of living in a very healthy lifestyle. And in those communities, we really see a picture of or a model where there is no metabolic diseases. So we can see communities where there is no obesity, no diabetes, and if you look at their lifestyle, there is no cheap or ice creams, and in the presence of regular physical activity with a purpose. So these indigenous communities shows us not just how amazing the way that they see the world, but it really tells us and teaches a model of extremely healthy lifestyle and what happened. So we did a study that was published in 2022 looking at these different communities in Brazil. It was kind of a very comprehensive cross-sectional study that we look at different databases, and we look at cardiometabolic health. We look at the prevalence of cardiometabolic risk factors in diverse communities in across Brazil. So Brazil, we do have a difference in terms of urbanization. There are communities living close to the Amazon region where they can continue or they continue to live a very healthy or a very the same lifestyle that they used to have like years ago. So it is an opportunity to see what happened with them. So you can see in this graph the prevalence of obesity. It's absent. Communities right now who still living close to the Amazon rainforest, they continue to have the same lifestyle that they used to have, and we see like strikingly low prevalence of obesity and hypertension. But as these communities move and regions where already went through a very rapid pace of urbanizations, we start to see the opposite. We start to see like very high prevalence of obesity and hypertension. So we also did a sub-analysis looking at the interaction between deforestation and prevalence of obesity. And you can see here communities that are living now in areas that were there was kind of burning in the forest. They are moved from the forest to areas kind of like very, very poor living conditions. We see the opposite. We see all these communities now eating with living with food insecurity, not exercising, living like a higher rates of depression, etc., and higher rates of obesity and hypertension, as opposed to communities who are still living like they used to, very low levels of obesity. And then you can look at this picture here, and I hope not that many people will say that, but you can say, but okay, but Dr. Kramer, listening, you are showing me a tent in the middle of the jungle, and yes, I am. And if you don't have the sensitivity to understand all the treasure that these communities have, but at least if I can tell you, like I said, that we can learn from them how they get to a point where there's no obesity. And this is way more than not eating ultra processed foods and Coca-Cola, drinking Coca-Cola. It's a whole holistic understanding of physical activity, on human relationships, and etc. And that's what I'm trying. I'm trying to show some studies on that. It's not just indigenous communities. We see the importance of populational health and of strategies that affect the whole community in other continents as well. So here again, showing the blood pressure, which is really stunning. So indigenous communities living their traditional ways. You can see here the average systolic blood pressure is around 100. And this is big without any antihypertensive and across the lifespan. So individuals with more than 60 years old, you see like very low blood pressure levels because they just don't eat salt, as opposed to communities when they start to get urbanized, on when this process of illegal urbanization start happening is the opposite. They are exposed to high processed foods and high salt intake, and the blood pressure goes up. But here, if we focus on their lifestyle, how we are supposed to live, this is what happened. We are primed. Our genetic background is as such that we should have very low blood pressure levels. That's what we are showing here. And as I said, not just this is not just seen in indigenous population, but in other continents as well. So in this study here that was published in Science last year, is a very interesting study that they look at individuals who are born or who were conceived during the Europe post-war in 1951 to 1954. There was a sugar rationing affecting these communities. So this is data from UK Biobank. And what they did is they look at kids who were conceived during that time. So you can see here in this is the amount of sugar during the time post-war and what happened after. And then they look at what happened later in life. The incidence of diabetes in these individuals. And they show that if you are a fetus during that time, you are conceived during a time of sugar rationing, they had less diabetes later on. They adjusted for multiple confounders, and again, making the point of the importance of the overall population exposure to those things and how that can affect metabolic diseases later in life. So the opposite also happened. So this is a study that they look at fetus, so women from 32 to 36 weeks of gestation, and what happened when their mother was exposed to kale. So they show that there is a crying face like of the fetus, which is a very interesting study, but it makes the point that we have the genetic background of hunter gatherers, right? So everything, the sweetness, we tend to recognize sweetness as a good thing as opposed to things that are savor. And this is because there was a genetic selection that was very important at that time, right? When we are hunter-gatherers. But now we move to a urbanized environment, we still have that brain that tends to get wired with ultra-processed and sweetness, and then that's what happened. So this concept is being shown in other studies. So this is a very interesting experiment when they try to test that hypothesis. It was 49 healthy individuals who they were exposed to yogurt. Not much, like yogurt 8 weeks, and divided as yogurt who had more sugar and fat twice a day for 8 weeks, compared to a group who was eating the same yogurt but low fat and low sugar. And then they look what happened with the satiety center. And there was a change. If you are exposed to high sugar yogurt twice a day for 8 weeks, you tend to crave more sweet. They showed this with functional PET scans, and they also had a subjective questionnaire showing these participants how badly do you want a milkshake. So if you are exposed to this sugar, that's not a lot, it already change your relationship with food. You tend to crave more unhealthy, an unhealthy pattern of diet. Again, showing the importance of that. And then this also translates to weight loss. This is a study that was just published in Nature Medicine. It's very nice to see lifestyle intervention being published in main journals like that. They look at weight loss in 2 different diets. They're both healthy diets, but one arm was supposed to have a very small amount of ultra-processed food, minimally processed food diet, as opposed to the standard healthy diet containing ultra-processed food. And they demonstrated that individuals, when they eat less ultra-processed foods, they lose more weight for some reason. They speculate that there is something about the satiety center that is triggered differently if you eat ultra-processed foods. That is in keeping with the experiment that I showed previously. So in this very nice review paper of Dr. Professor Monteiro, which is a Brazilian researcher, there is a very nice review on what ultra-processed foods does. So they are hyperpalatable foods and they are very high energy dense. They contain emulsifiers, conservatives, contaminations, etc., that disrupt the gut-brain signaling of food value, enhancing the food reward. So you want to eat more, you crave more. And also there is a very negative impact in terms of satiety hormones. So that's what our ultra processed foods does, and also changes in microbiome. This is published in Nature Endocrinology Reviews. It is impressive. I really recommend that you all read, because it's very, very interesting. So just to remind you, the NOVA classification, this is a most cited classification for how processed the foods are. So when we talk about minimally processed food, these are real foods like meat, fruits, vegetables, etc. Then we start processing. When we cook, we process this food. We add culinary ingredients like oils, sugar, salt, etc. But the foods that are really unhealthy are the ultra processed foods, are the foods that all that junk stuff like cookies, highly processed bread, soft drinks, cakes, ice creams, etc. So one good way of thinking about ultra processed foods is to think on foods that contain ingredients that we don't have in our kitchen. So you look at hydrogenated fats and etc. Those are the foods that are more I would say unhealthy. So each country has regulations regarding food additives. It really varies. Um, and it's actually very interesting that the NOVA classification was developed by a Brazilian researcher, but Brazilian foods, they have way more additives than we have in Canada. There is a lot of compounds and substances that are still allowed to be used there and is not allowed here. There are studies showing that some of these components are related to incidence of cancers and etc. But what I showed so far, and I'm focusing on metabolic diseases, is that ultra processed foods, for some reason, can disrupt the satiety center, and it is associated with obesity and metabolic diseases. And how we process the food, it does matter. So this is the potato study. Is what it was just published in BMJ. It's very interesting. They look at three main big epidemiological studies, and they look at how much servings per week relates to the incidence of type 2 diabetes. I really don't like to talk about one particular component of food. I think it's all about the pattern. But this study is very interesting because they look at they show that French fries are associated with higher prevalence of diabetes, and it was not the same association was not true for baked potato or mashed potato, showing that there is something about the processing that is associated with type 2 diabetes. And they also modeled the results, and they showed that if you substitute, if you change 3 servings of French fries to whole grain, you can reduce the incidence of diabetes by 20%. Again, if you tell your patient in a one-on-one consult that they should reduce French fries, you're not going to be reducing 20% the chances of that particular patient to have diabetes. But these are models showing that the impact of small changes in a population level, and this is huge. And the same idea we already did in Brazil. So this is a study that I've done when I was a resident in internal medicine in 2015 with Dr. Mirella Azevedo. And we use like cultural types of foods to make small changes. Like in this study here, we look at postprandial glucose excursions and insulin resistance in patients with type 2 diabetes. And we just change the white bread the Brazilians used to have for whole wheat bread, and we add papaya in a breakfast meal, and we show that can really be beneficial with the same amount of calories. And just to prove the point and to show that we can use cultural sensitive approaches, small changes, we can and we can have like a big impact in these communities. So that raises the question then, what else can we do that can change maybe the natural history of diabetes? So this is a study that I did during my postdoctoral fellowship at Dr. Ratnakara's lab, that we are looking at intensive insulin therapy early in the course of diabetes to see if that can prevent diabetes, that if that can improve beta cell function. And we showed that insulin therapy, like multiple daily injections of insulin early on in diabetes, it can reduce like about 50% of individuals after 1 year will be in remission. But so far, there is no pharmacological strategy that was proven to prevent the progression of pancreatic beta cell dysfunction. So those are all studies from Dr. Reknakaran's lab that I had the opportunity to be a collaborator. They are all negative, studying the idea of using exenatide, liraglutide, intensive insulin combined with intensive insulin therapy in the beginning. And they showed that medications, including insulin therapy and GLP-1 agonists, do not prevent the progression or the progressive nature of beta cell dysfunction in early type 2 diabetes. Okay, this is really, it's really bad. But what about lifestyle? What about everything that I showed so far? So then, of course, I'm not going to tell you that intermittent fasting is the magic fix for all of people's problems like the media try to make, but there is a point on intermittent fasting that we should think. So what happened in the American lifestyle, right? People eat 8 to 10 times daily. If they eat carbohydrates, it means that you have 8 to 10 insulin peaks happening, right? You are overburdening your beta cell function. And when I think back on, okay, but what about my indigenous community who doesn't have diabetes? What do? They eat once or twice a day. I'm not going to talk about quality of food, which is extremely healthy, but in their culture, that's what happened. They eat in the morning, like a huge breakfast, and they go do their activities. They go fix their house, they do it, and then they regroup in the end of the day to have a second meal. And between, they do have some snacks, but all like fruits, whole foods. So maximum 3 times. And here we see the American pattern 8 to 8 times daily. So if we do intermittent fasting or if we prolong fasting, the idea is that we're going to have we're going to eat less times, like less insulin peaks. So this is what happened. With prolonged fasting, we go from carbohydrate oxidation to increasing lipid oxidation and generation of ketone bodies, ketosis, that it is associated with reduction in hunger and some positive effects in terms of satiety hormones. So one important thing to consider when we do intermittent fasting or prolonged fasting, it triggers a metabolic shift to lipid oxidation that doesn't require insulin. It is an insulin independent pathway. Okay, so that maybe that's good for the beta cells. And that's what we tested. So this is my baby. This is my first little trial that I just published. That what we've done, we use an approach called time-restricted eating. So patients were only advised to eat between 4 and 8 or 5 to 9 p.m. So this is kind of the Canadian dinner time. So we did a crossover trial in 39 patients with type 2 diabetes and living with overweight obesity. They were not taking insulin or GLP-1 agonists, and we checked what happened with their beta cells. So we show that there was an improvement in beta cell function assessed by EZ2, which is a validated measure by Dr. Retnakaran. And we also showed that improved insulin resistance. So that was a great strategy, short term. So we only did 6 weeks. Patients, they really like it. A lot of them are my clinical patients now. They see that they want to repeat or they want to continue. They have a very difficult time the first week adapting, but after that, they said that it was fine. What was the caveat of this study was that they lost weight. They lost about 5% of body weight with intermittent fasting compared to the standard. So we cannot say that it was the time-restricted eating that improved beta cell. It could be that was all driven by the weight loss, right? So this is the so that was one problem. The second is it was short term, right? So we don't know if that's something feasible or if that's something that people can sustain over 1 year. And this is in a post hoc study of this trial that we look at satiety hormones, and this is unpublished data. So we show the same changes that happen when people lose weight. So an increment in ghrelin and a reduction in leptin, showing that there is nothing miraculous about intermittent fasting. When you lose weight, there is an attempt by the body to recover the weight that was lost, increasing hormones that will make people hungrier. So that's what we show in this paper, but it's still an interesting strategy. And we hope to do now. I just got funding for a 1-year study. So the idea is that we want, those are my collaborators here, including Dr. Luciana Viana, which is my Brazilian friend. So we are hoping to do a study looking at this strategy, what happened in beta cell function over 1 year, and if that's something sustainable or and that we can maintain. So we talk about population examples as a whole model of health, ultra-processed foods, time-restricted eating. So I can't talk about non-pharmacological strategies without saying anything about physical activity, which is the most important, one of the most important pillars of non-pharmacological treatment. And just if you guys follow this Hollywood stuff, so someone has to tell Demi Moore that the substance for actually the font of youth is actually non-pharmacological, right? It's not a medication who does that. So in this very cool study, they come up with a way utilizing multiple biomarkers to see if physical activity, and what point, how much exercise do people need to get to a point that they have like better health in terms of inflammatory markers and etc. And they showed that apparently for patients with type 2 diabetes, 500 minutes of physical activity is kind of the sweet spot to get less overall inflammation, and according to this style that they studied. So it's not a medication, it is physical activity. What's the problem with physical activity? There are multiple issues with that. I think one is really the main things, right? Is you have to sustain. The second, I think, is the misunderstanding. Usually when people want to try to modify their lifestyle, they associate physical activity with weight loss. So they join a gym, they start walking, and once they hit a plateau, they are not losing weight anymore, they drop physical activity. The idea is that physical activity should be perceived as something that we need to do for overall well-being, for mobility, for cardiovascular health, not exactly to burn calories. So this study show very nicely that what happens when we increase physical activity, it's not an additive model. So the amount of calories that you burn is not simply added. Rather, it is a compensation model. When you increase the amount of calories that you are burning in physical activity, your basal metabolic rate will decrease. Yeah, I know that sucks, but that's what it is. So about 72%, according to this study, of the calories that you burn from physical activity will actually translate into calories that you burn. So just another example that to make the point, right, that physical activity should not be perceived as something that you do to lose weight. Is way more than that. And the point is to implement. That's very difficult. So there are many studies looking at different exercise prescriptions that we can do. I like really to talk about simple approaches, and because we are talking here about population health, what works in terms of population. So in this study, they showed that if people increase the step count from 2,000 to 7,000, is not a lot. It is already associated with reduction in all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, cancer mortality, type 2 diabetes, dementia, and depression. And those are only the outcomes that were evaluated in this analysis, showing the importance of like small changes, but in overall population. There are studies showing that the snack exercise. So if you have a desk job and you stand up for 5-10 minutes every hour or 2 hours, it is already associated with better cardiovascular risk factors. There are studies that look at the weekend warrior effect. So if patients are not able to accommodate physical activity spread out through the weekend, if they do 150 minutes of physical activity only on weekend, it is the same, it is associated with the same benefit. Just, of course, we need to be careful if our patient has type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular risk, and is sedentary, they can run a marathon on a weekend, right? We need to do the proper cardiovascular screening and assessment. But this is showing, these studies are showing that these small changes, they are worthy. They may not be associated with a lot of weight loss, but it is associated with reduction, significant reduction in cardiovascular diseases. And this is like one experience that we had. So we put our colleagues to play soccer. We announced to the entire division, but we got just few folks here playing, and they played pretty badly, but we were exercising. So I think this is important to engage the community and for our patients to make them continue doing these things. What else we can do in terms of holistically change lifestyle? And for this, I am deeply conflicted. I think Lorraine knows what I'm going to talk about. So this is my friend Romeo, and I changed. I used to say that I was Romeo's owner, but I think he owns me, so it's more like a friendship association. So this is another point that I want to make here about change, especially when we are talking about preventing cardiometabolic diseases in a whole family or in children. There are other holistic things that can help. So having a dog, this study showed that if you are a dog companion, it's going to increase your physical activity regardless of the weather. This study was done in England, and it rains a lot, and they showed that people who had dogs, they walk way more compared to those who did not. Another important aspect of that is the dogs that we have in North America, and especially in South America, they were not brought by the colonizers. So only less than 30% of the indigenous American breeds have European ancestry. So this study looked at the DNA, mitochondrial DNA of some breeds in America and East Asia and Europe. And they showed that actually most of the dogs that are present in North America and in South America, they walk with us. Like that back in the days, the whole theory that we all came from the Bering Strait down here. So this study showed that they were walking with us for more than 15,000 years ago. So they gotta be good for our health. And yes, right, sometimes like having a dog, it can be very challenging, like the human-dog communication. So as you can see here, my friend Romeo is a very tough cookie to make him do anything. But there are studies showing that there is a silent communication between dogs and humans, and that's very beautiful. In this study that was published in Science, they showed that when we are with our dogs, there is an increase in oxytocin that happen in the dog and in the human. So it's one of the first experiments to show that there is a communication between two different species. So just to point like how beautiful it is, the animal interaction and humans. And we demonstrated that now looking at the kind of a hard outcome, if you have a dog that is associated with decrease in cardiovascular events by 24%. This is data from observational studies, obviously with all the limitations of observational studies, but we show there is a positive effect in people with prior cardiovascular disease of more than 65%, and overall population-based studies, a reduction of 22%, even after adjusting for other confounders. And here again, so that's Romeo. So this was, I think, was one of the few, according to the editor, was the first acknowledgement to a doggy. I really had to fight for that, but that's Romeo, like acknowledged in this publication. And we went to see and to make the point, then having a dog of this friendship and everything that it is related to that is not just about making you exercise more, but reduce blood pressure, reduce depression, etc. So those are interventions, like not an intervention, but in terms of changes in lifestyle, in approaches and relationship with food and animals that can improve health. And Romeo went everywhere, went to New York Times, CNN, and we try to make that point, that lifestyle is not just about food, it is about a whole lot of things that are difficult to change. And in parallel to that, there are other things, right? So this is kind of a meta-analysis that we've done looking at laughter. So I did with my good friend, Cristiane Leitão. She's now the Dean of Medicine in Brazil. And we look at what happened with basal cortisol after a session of laughter compared to other leisure activities. Those are it is a meta-analysis of randomized clinical trials, and we show that there is a significant reduction in basal cortisol, just showing that the impact of laughter and overall well-being in terms of stress hormones and probably inflammatory markers. So yeah, and thinking holistically, I think that there's a lot of news story. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot from the population studies. I think that the incretin trials shows us a lot what we can do when we decrease the prevalence of obesity and obesity-related comorbidities. But there are newer stories that unfortunately we still need to rewrite. And they pertain to representation and affordability. So there was a very recent study here that demonstrated that the genetic population of Brazil, for example, this is just an example. Brazilians are very admixed. We have like Native American, European, African, Asian, DNA. And what my colleagues show in this study is that the genomic databases, they are 70-80% Caucasians. So just to show that a lot of things in terms of genetic studies, they don't really apply to a population like Brazil. And as an example, and they probably don't apply to other populations as well. So in this study here, our resident Yano Yakumar, she looked at the representation of racialized and ethnically diverse populations in the trials of GLP-1 medicines for obesity. And what we show is that the whites, no surprisingly, are overrepresented in relation to the prevalence of whites or Caucasian by country. So for example, here, if we compare the prevalence of whites in the trials, it has way more as opposed to comparing to the prevalence of whites in Canada. Even more in Brazil, there's an overrepresentation compared to the prevalence of whites in the Brazilian population, and not to mention the African continent. So just showing that the current trials, they do not represent all populations in the same way. Another important aspect of this was that the minority of the sites of recruitment were located in low or middle income countries. More than 80% of the study sites were located in high income countries. And that it goes in contrast with the estimated prevalence of obesity, right? The obesity is gonna go higher, much more in low and middle income countries than high income countries. Yes, there are a lot of problems with this in terms of generalizing the results. I'm not sure if there are biological differences. So in terms of GLP-1 inducing more weight loss in Black folks as opposed to white, like we don't know that. The studies that were done don't seem to show that. It seems that it is the same. But I think the issue here is deeper. There are historical problems, and I just want to show you here, because when we are writing this paper, I went to review like some of these well-known horrible things from the past. And this is the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in United States. So this study was published in 1954. This is the first one, just to remind you. So this was a study where a Black community in the United States started to be followed without informed consent. They wanted to see what was the natural history of untreated syphilis. The issue was that this study started in 1942, But no, in 1932. In 1942, 10 years later, penicillin was widely available in United States. They followed these individuals for decades after penicillin was available, and they published. So this is Archives of Internal Medicine, 1964, showing here proudly the 30 year of observation. So they followed these individuals for 30 years. From the last 20 years, penicillin was already available. And they report what's happening. Oh my God, they develop cardiac disease, they develop this, they develop that. So now when we look at it, and the reason I'm showing, because it's one thing we all know that, but when you look at the publication, I think has a different impact to understand why Black communities, why people have like they don't trust the system, why they don't want to take part of studies, why, right? That's one of the reasons. And again, just to raise the point and to show it that we do have to be concerned, we do have to work on representation. It is a circle. The less represented they are, they tend to it just feed the mistrust in the system. But we do have to understand why people feel that way, and not just then. And after, of course, the American government, they do apologize. They give like small amount of money for these families, but there are still people alive suffering the consequences. They not only did this in the United States, but then they move to another place. Of course, right? They go offshore. Where do they go? They go to Guatemala. And they tested the same thing, even worse than the Tukiji trial. The Tukiji, they say, oh, these people are already infected, so we just observe them. So here, no, they did infected vulnerable people in Guatemala. The same idea between 1942, at the time that penicillin was already available, to see. Now they are testing here serology, how to diagnose syphilis and to see what happened. And up to this day, there are reports. So this is a very nice article published in The Guardian showing one of the survivors. She was 7 years old at the time, and she was infected with infectious disease to test it out. And this study was funded by NIH and the government of United States. This is not pharma study. These are public funded studies. So just showing again, right, how that we have to be very careful when we are studying, when we are doing observational trials in populations and in different places, and in places who are low or middle income. They have different needs. They need to be heard, and we need to work with them when we do everything or anything in these populations. So those are very ugly chapters. I think that we need to acknowledge, we need to understand, so we can move forward and work with these populations to try to improve them. And I'm going to show here a very nice, the opposite, a very nice randomized clinical trial that was done by the group where I train in Brazil. So this is a simple trial showing how you can do something that is very meaningful for that population. It was a study looking at what happened if you reuse the syringes. So when it's not covered, that it can be very expensive for a family who don't have much income. And they look in this study in terms of adherence, contamination, penetration force, technique, and they show that if you reuse the syringes up to 5 times, it can still be fine. So just showing that that we can do research and things with the community that can be very meaningful to them. And to start, to finish with a very nice and positive look. So this is a study that Dr. Gabriela Natividade did with us here. So she came for an elective. And we look at what happened with cardiovascular outcomes after Brazil start funding they are offering dapagliflozin free of charge. They start with this program in 2021 for patients with diabetes more than 65 years old. And we show here very nicely what happened with cardiovascular events. So these are the trend prior to that public measure. It was already declining, but you can see here that after this population was able to get dapagliflozin for free, there was a steep decrement in cardiovascular outcomes, showing that the impact of a population measure or intervention, and in this case here, just to offer this medication for free in a middle income country can really change, can really reduce cardiovascular outcomes. So where are we in terms of lifestyle intervention in the 27th? This is my closure slide. So yes, we do have to target high risk, the high risk tail, right, in terms of offering pharmacological approaches for everyone who needs. But what we can do in terms of population, and that's the most, in my opinion, the most impactful intervention that we can do is if we are able to shift the entire population risk. And here, in terms of cardiometabolic disease, I would say simple things like having people eating whole foods, real food, less ultra-processed with less salt and added sugar, maybe potential role of intermittent fasting, at least like if they eat less snacks, less ultra-processed, if people are able to keep a regular regimen of physical activity, that everything that we do in terms of lifestyle is not about one isolated pattern. It is a holistic approach, and that I would add the value of friendship or having a meaningful job, having dog or woman, and having a lifestyle that we can do all this and we can really laugh more. I would say that with the hope that we can shift these curves here. And yes, medicine for everyone who needs. So I just want to acknowledge our research staff here, the collaborators of the work that I show, our trainees and funding agencies. And I'm going to add with this very nice quote by Charles that he says that all his life he tried to be a good person. Many times, however, he failed, for after all, he was only human. He was not a dog. Thank you.
Oh, Caroline, oh, what a fantastic presentation. Thank you so, so much. You covered an incredible amount of information and really, really important and well researched, dating all the way back to, things from the previous century all the way to now. Really impressive. Thank you so much. I will open it up for questions. Let me see what's happening in the chat. We've got lots of, people have said thank you with lots of comments. Does anyone have any specific questions for Dr. Kramer? So while people are thinking about it, maybe I'll ask you, Carolyn. So, I loved how you started with the sort of, traditional hunter-gatherer communities and the really elegant work you did showing differences in blood pressure and differences in obesity between the urbanized communities and those who live more traditional lifestyles. Clearly, I mean, I struggle with this a lot. It's very difficult to go back, right? So, it's very difficult for even in our indigenous populations, and I don't want to speak for them because, I'm not indigenous, but certainly, many of them, I think would love to see more traditional, going back to more traditional lifestyles and traditional diet and activity patterns. But the realities of, modern life and where we are now makes it very difficult for a whole host of reasons. So, are there ways that people have been successful in bringing back some of that, traditional lifestyle to communities that have been very badly hit now by obesity and cardiovascular and cardiometabolic disease?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Lorraine. And then it is also, when we talk about urbanization, we are talking about it is about social determinants of health. It is about they usually, or either the urbanization happened there or they move to big centers, then they don't have, depending on all the cultural barriers or the historical, the everything that happened with indigenous, right? Like how discrepant, how discriminated against they are, and etc. puts them in a very low rank in terms of getting jobs. They don't have enough money. What's the food that is cheaper? It is the ultra processed food. So it's a whole kind of, it's very complex. I think that I can only speak and understand better what happened with the Brazilian communities, because we still have, because of the Amazon rainforest was not the forest completely, we still have very dense forest. And they only were able to survive there because the colonizer wouldn't survive in the dense forest. So it was their knowledge of the forest. So in Brazil, we have these communities that are in the edge of the forest and the rivers, and then you have the urban centers. So for those communities there, the way to protect them is to protect the forest, is to give them space to do, they do like harvest, they do a bit of not just hunt, but they have their own like agro place there, and it's a very different way, even like it's not a monoculture, they do different species at the same time, they have a lot of knowledge of the soil, but there is something very particular to those communities. When they move to urbanized areas, I see in the opposite way. They need to be better integrated to the culture, right? So then it's not, you cannot go, oh no, now you do your indigenous thing. No, they need to be integrated. And in terms specifically of lifestyle modification, what we tell our patients is really like it is in kin to traditional ways of living, right? Like eat less processed, less sugar, less salt. So I don't think that we are far away, but yes, I think again is very particular to each community, and that's why I said that it's important to work with them. But yeah, of course, right? If you look at how they live, what they eat, it's impossible, right? Because it's part of our culture, right? And even the amount of time that we stay seated, for example. So yeah, but I think we can incorporate when we can, and I think that a lot of the things are not exactly, it doesn't oppose what we say, right?
Yeah, but I mean, awareness and data to support, like this sort of understanding, what works and what doesn't, I think is part of the using those data then to advocate for upstream change so that we can actually make healthy foods more accessible, et cetera, right?
Yes.
Um, I see Councillor Reed has his hand up. We're very pleased to have one of our city councillors from Mississauga. Councillor Reed, go ahead.
Thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for that. And I was, as I'm looking at this, we're going through some of these, situations at work here with council, where even this week it's coming to council a recommendation on healthy food recommendations for our vending, in our say our hockey arenas and our vending machines. And this is something that started before I was at council. But what's happening now is that they've tried to pull back and go with all these healthy options, and then people start to complain that they can't buy hot chocolate at the ice rinks anymore. So now they've come back and they're saying, well, we're going to make it 25%, like there's a certain percentage. 50% of the beverages have to meet nutritional standards. 25% prepackaged foods have to meet. So they start playing with the percentages. So I just wonder what's your thoughts on, when we start to implement these standards and then realize that it's almost too hard to stick with it, and then the adherence drops off, and then making these kind of gradual steps. Like, what's your thoughts on that, on that process?
Oh, thank you so much, Martin. That's very important, and I think that, yeah. So I can totally get it, right? You're not gonna say that you're gonna go to a public event, and let's say if I go to see the Jays, I wanna have my hot dog, kind of thing, right? But yeah, I think if in adults, I think kind of finding offering more healthy foods, continue to offer what people really want. I think we have to go gradually, slowly. There is one study, I don't know if you guys came across that. There was one study that was done at UCLA campus that they do. I can send to you. I have to just pull up the reference. They did a vending machine. They changed that percentage. I think it was 20% or I think a little more. They changed the snacks from still ultra processed but healthier. Let's say potato chips, they changed to nuts and things. So they to try to offer healthier options. and they looked at revenue, how much the vending machine was selling, and they showed it was actually the same thing. Just to point that if you just offer more healthy foods, people will buy more. Maybe it's the way to go. I do think though that for children, if you go to schools, I don't know what's the bylaws right now in Canada, but in Brazil there is a project in smaller cities that they are not offering sugary drinks anymore. It's just water, and or like there are some fruits in Brazil that are very low in sugar that they make like naturally there. So I think that there is a very important age bracket that there we are going to establish habits, and for the whole population. But I agree with you. I think that the way to go is to be kind of balanced, right? Offer more healthy foods, but we cannot just cut like overnight, like just take things out and people are going to complain. I can see that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. And it's interesting because there's also this tension around free choice, right? That, obviously, as a city, you can have your, you have a responsibility to the citizens to promote health, right? But at the same time, people feel like, they don't, you have to balance that with people's adults feeling like they don't want to be imposed upon too much. So it has to be a combination of, that advocacy and access, but also helping to raise awareness amongst the citizens and empowering them to make those healthy choices. So it's one thing, you know what I mean? So hopefully with time, more people will recognize that the healthier choice is the water over the Coke, but that takes time. And so we have to have a multi-pronged approach. It's not easy. And especially with healthy foods being more expensive. That's the other thing, right? It would be great to have a bowl of apples every day at the rink, but can you imagine? Like they don't last forever, and like when you get it's much more complicated. So anyway, but I see we're at 1 minute to the hour. So once again, please join me in giving a big thank you to Carolyn Kramer for a really amazing, inspiring talk. I can see that a lot of people in the chat gave you some positive feedback, and we're really, really happy that you were able to spend this hour with us sharing on your amazing research. Please keep it up, Carolyn. And please keep sharing it with all of us. We're just really grateful. So please ensure you complete today's evaluation. Lydia's added the link to the chat pod, and we'll also send it by email to those of you who've registered. And it's really important that you complete the evaluation for us. These are really important for us to make sure that we are inviting speakers that are most of value to our audience. We also really need the evaluations to be able to maintain our status, to be able to collect continuing medical education credits. So we really appreciate people filling it out. Our next Network for Healthy Population seminar is a special seminar in person in Mississauga on Thursday, October 16th. We actually have an international speaker, Dr. Li Ling Lim from Malaysia, who's an endocrinologist from Malaysia, who will be speaking on the work she's doing at the Malay Medical Center University. So we will send you further details as we know more. It will be hybrid for those who can't make it in person. But once again, thank you very much, everyone. This talk will also be available on our website, as well as opportunity to register for future events. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Thank you, Carolyn. Have a wonderful day.